So, welcome to day 2. Today we're going to be talking about the two different types of evolution that Darwin studied. So, he looked at artificial selection and natural selection while creating his theory, which he published in his book on the origin of species, right? So, I'm sure just from the images you can kind of guess which one belongs to which, right? All right, so the first thing we need to know about is artificial selection. Artificial selection basically means when humans breed different animals together or plants together to have offspring which look the way that we want. So let's say I wanted a bunch of little white kittens. How would I get that? I would bring a mother cat who's white and a father cat who's also white, and I would breed them together to make sure that all their babies look the way that I want. This is called artificial selection because it's not natural. It's something that humans are choosing to do. It's not something that nature chose. In nature, not all cats look like this, obviously. We are the ones who make them look like this by deciding which cats get to mate with each other. And the same thing happens with plants and vegetables and stuff like that. The vegetables that we grow now produce fruits that are way, way, way bigger than they used to be. And they also produce more fruit than they used to. This is because we took plants that produce a lot of fruit and we allowed them to produce offspring together. So every generation, the plants make more and more and more fruit. They are what we chose, not what nature chose, though, right? So you see this cabbage and Brussels sprouts and all of these actually originated from one plant, this little guy right here. Okay, so that's artificial selection. Now this is natural selection. Natural selection can often be described as survival of the fittest. So survival of the fittest basically means that only the one who is the most fit for their environment will survive. So if you look at the picture right here, see, this guy got caught and this one got away, which means all future generations of this type of animal are going to be more like this one. Maybe this one had an advantage that this one didn't have. Maybe he was faster, maybe he was smarter. So the future generations of this animal are going to be faster and smarter than the one that got eaten. The reason this is important is that if you have an advantage, you will most likely produce more offspring into the next generation. If you're at a disadvantage, you'll probably die before you ever produce offspring. So the next generations are not going to carry your genes that did not carry an advantage, right? So this is called survival of the fittest. If you are more fit, you will survive long enough to reproduce, and you'll probably have a lot more children than organisms that are unfit. All right, so there are 4 basic principles when it comes to natural selection. That in a population, individuals show variation, variation is heritable, more offspring are born than can survive, and variation that increases reproductive success will be more common in the next generation. I know that this is just a lot of words. We're going to explain it right now. All right, so the first thing we need to know is in a population, we need to have variation. Variation means that there needs to be differences. The reason this is so important is that if we were all exactly the same, we would all have the same advantages and the same disadvantages. So let's say that a disease came that killed me. If we were all exactly the same, that same disease would kill all of us. But if some of us are different, some of us might be able to survive, and the survivors will be able to reproduce to the next generation. So the next generation will also have those genes that allowed that organism to survive, right? Variation is extremely important. The next thing is these variations need to be heritable. Heritability means that you need to be able to pass it on to the next generation through your DNA. So there are some variations that we get throughout our life, like you can dye your hair purple. That's not a heritable variation because your children are not going to be born with purple hair. But if you are extra smart or you have immunity to the Black Plague or something like that, that could actually be a variation that is heritable that you can pass on to future generations. So future generations will carry your genes that allowed you to survive for so long, meaning that they will also be able to survive through the same things that you went through. And weaker organisms will not, be able to pass their genes on to the next generation. The next thing is overproduction. A lot of organisms have way more children or way more offspring than can actually survive. So you see all these little seeds on the ground? These are thousands of seeds that fell out of these sunflowers. These sunflowers right here produce all of these seeds, but not all of them are actually going to survive. The reason overproduction is important because it gives a food source to other animals. So if the sunflower had 100 seeds, maybe 2 of them will grow into new sunflowers, and all the rest of them will go to feeding the birds and other animals that need food to survive. This is how come the sunflower doesn't get eaten straight away, because it produces food for other organisms while it still has enough to produce offspring that will grow and survive. And the last thing is reproductive advantage. So a reproductive advantage basically means that you have an advantage in your area. You see this flower right here? It's the biggest flower. It's the tallest one. You'd think, wow, this must be the best flower there is. The truth is, this one does not have a reproductive advantage. The rest of them do because they're all on the same level, so they're able to reproduce and spread pollen between them. But this one doesn't get pollen from the rest of them, so it actually will not be able to reproduce and send its genes off into the next generation. So the next generation of flowers are actually all going to be about this height, and this trait, the tall flower, actually would have died off during this generation. So we have variation. All organisms need to be a little bit different in a population. If we're all copy-paste of each other, that is not a good thing. It means that if something comes that can hurt one of us, it'll hurt all of us. So we need to have a little bit of differences. These variations, these differences, need to be heritable, meaning you need to be able to give them to your offspring for them to count in evolution. And overproduction. Organisms have a lot more offspring than they need because it actually helps them to survive. A few of them will survive. Not every single one of them is going to get eaten. So they produce a lot of offspring to make sure that at least a few of them can survive. And finally, reproductive advantage. Only organisms that are at an advantage and can reproduce will add their genes to the next generation. So for the example of sunflowers, only these ones, all the new generations of sunflowers are going to look like this, not like this, because he did not have a reproductive advantage. All right, so this is basically just the same idea. You guys can go ahead and look at this on your own. This will help you do your assignment, which is on Shobi. And finally, natural selection is not the only way that organisms evolve. And this is basically what Charles Darwin wrote in his book On the Origin of Species. So he basically wrote these 4 points, and he also brought up a lot of evidence from artificial selection while explaining his theory of natural selection, right? And he also concluded that organisms evolve over a very, very, very long period of time. It doesn't happen very quickly, just like that. And it happens because of the 4 principles that we just discussed earlier. Now you guys can watch this video on your own. It is on Nearpod. It's really nice. It's just showing the evolution of this animal into a whale. You might really like it. And finally, once you're done, you're going to go into Shobi. Once you reach this slide, you're done. Go into Shobi, go do your assignment, and do your quiz. And then you're done day 2 work. Good luck.